Hey there everybody, it's Mike DiLisio, and today I'm going to be taking a look at Aqua Garden from designer Tatsuka Chuo and publisher Uchiba Koya. In Aqua Garden, you are trying to create the most beautiful aquarium by gaining diverse and beautiful sea life. How does this all play out? Well, let's head over to the table. I'll show you briefly how the game plays, then we'll come back here and I'll give you my final thoughts. Okay, here we see a setup for Aqua Garden. What you see in front of you are some major components of the game. We've got the fair board here, which is going to be where you are moving your owner token around the board, collecting fish to be placed onto your player board. This is a player board right here. It has 6 aquarium tanks that you will be placing this sea life into. You'll either be getting fish from this fair board or potentially purchasing fish from the seaboard, which is right over here. Also, what you're going to see are these 4 milestone cards, and you're going to have one for the 4 main types of sea life: the small and large fish, the sharks, the sea turtles, and the whale sharks and or seahorses. These are just randomly selected. There are multiples of each type. You just would randomly choose one, put it out there on the main player area. All right, so on your turn, you're going to be doing a couple of things. You're going to be moving your owner token, and then you're going to be taking the action, or you're going to be passing. And the way the game works is that turn order is determined by who is furthest back on this track. Think of this as like a bit of a rondelle. You're moving as far as you want to in a clockwise direction around the board. There are a number of games that use this mechanic, and basically, if there's a piece that you really want but it's pretty far ahead, you can jump forward and take it, but then other people are potentially going to be taking multiple turns before your turn comes around because it's the last player in turn order. So, just for this example, I've got my player board here as the orange player, conveniently first shot here on the round. So let's say, for example, that I really wanted to pick up this sea turtle, all right? What you do is you, again, move as far as you want, and you take that. If this is you have fish spots and advertisement spots. The light blue are the fish spots, which you will most likely go to more often, I should say, and the dark blue spots are your aquarium. So you take whatever sea life is on the spot. Later in the game, you may have multiple tokens on one spot, but at the beginning of the game, you're only going to have one because these are randomly chosen out of the bag during setup. You don't place it in your aquarium right away. You put it off to the side. Once you have collected any sea life on a fish space, then what you have to do is you have to move your assistant here in your main aquarium board 1 to 3 spaces. They cannot stay on the space that they were. This is their starting space. It has a little dotted line around it. So you're going to move 1 to 3 spaces and then place any sea life that you collected that turn or potentially bought from the seaboard into one of the 2 adjacent tanks to where they end. There's always going to be 2 adjacent tanks to every one of these spots. So let's say the first thing I want to do is move 3 spaces. 1, 2, well, maybe just 2. I'll just do 2 spaces. Now, you see this little icon here. What this means is you're going to immediately collect 1 fund. All right, you start the game with 2 funds. You get an immediate extra fund. You also could get extra funds dependent upon what are in these 2 event tanks. Now, this is a random event card that was dealt to me at the beginning of the game. What this shows is coral and sharks. And so what this is saying is that every time that I cross that spot, for every combination of 1 coral and 1 shark, I would get an extra fund. So if I had something like this in my tanks, in one of my 2 event tanks when I passed there, I would gain 2, 1 for the automatic and an extra 1 for that. If I had an extra 2 and maybe another one down here, they don't have to be in the same tank, that would be 3 altogether. Okay, so that was, again, just randomly chosen. There are different event card. So you might want the clownfish with the coral, you might want the large fish with the coral, you might want a sea turtle and a small fish. things along those lines, okay? So, but I had decided to go here, I believe, and those were not there. All right. Once I've done that, I have a couple of options. I can go ahead and place that right away, but I also could purchase from the seaboard. I actually could have purchased from here before I moved. You can purchase before and after you move, so up to 2 times. Everything on this seaboard costs you 2 funds, no matter what it is. Now, in a moment, I'm going to show you why I'm going to do this, but I'm going to purchase for 2 a seaweed, all right, which is going to go right there because I haven't placed it yet. Now, those have to be placed either in this tank or in this tank because those are the 2 that are adjacent to that player. Now, every tank, and this is shown along the bottom of the board here, and actually I'll get one out of the box to show you a little bit more close up. Along the bottom of the board, you can see kind of a key for how this works. You have a base oxygen level of 4 in each one of these tanks. So each of these tanks has 4 oxygen. Every sea life that you put in there is going to consume a particular amount of oxygen with one exception. So small fish, large fish, coral, seahorses each take up 1 of the 4 oxygen. Sea turtles take up 2, but if you see this little notation here, you can't place a turtle in a tank without seaweed. So that's why I got that seaweed. Sharks take up 2 oxygen, but if you have any small fish, large fish, or turtles, they're going to eat those, and those go away. Whales take up 4. However, when you put in a seaweed, it adds 2, so you would have 6 instead of 4. You can never have more than 1 seaweed or 1 coral in any one tank, so you'll never go above 6 in any of those. All right, so I go ahead and I place both of these here. I can put the turtle there because I have the seaweed. I chose not to put either of them there because I want to kind of keep these tanks, if I can, for sharks and coral. All right? So that, generally speaking, is how a turn is going to go when you go to a fish space. All right? Other players might go. They may take their fish. This one may pop all the way up here and grab the whale shark. This player may come right here. Then next in turn order would be green. Maybe they come up here. All right. Now, I would be next because I'm in last place. At this point, I could jump all the way forward if I wanted to. Let's say instead that I wanted to go to an ad space. An ad space is one way that you can get more funds, and these are printed right on the board. For every 2 clown sharks that you have represented on your board, you'd get a fund. For every large fish, you'd get a fund. For every shark, you'd get 1, and an extra 1 for every coral. For every sea turtle, you'd get 1, plus 1 for every coral. So in this case, I would only get 1 fund because I have 1 coral. You don't have to have both here. This is just saying you'd get 1 for a turtle and an extra 1 for any coral you have. Then it would be the gray players. Maybe they went and got some funds, and it's back to me. You keep going until you have chosen any of the fish you want to take, or if you end up here on that last spot, maybe I jumped all the way forward there, moved here, popped the shark down here. Once you've gotten here, the next thing you have to do is go to the lowest spot on this turn tracker for the next round. So if other players had gone and I had a chance, I can sneak in there and I'd be first in the next round of turn order. All right. At the end of the round, what you're going to do is you're going to fill up any of the spaces that have, actually all of the light blue spaces. So if any of the fish had not been chosen in the previous round, you would have 2 on those spots, so you could potentially get more fish. All right, so placing fish into these tanks, you're doing this not only for end game points, which you're going to get for particular sea life in your aquarium at the end of 4 rounds in a 4-player game, 3 rounds in a 3-player game, but you are also trying to achieve these milestone cards. And what these show are particular variations of sea life in your aquarium. So what this is saying is you want 2 large fish, 2 small fish, and a seaweed. If you're ever able to get that configuration, you're going to take your little marker and place it on the highest most spot. So if I was the first one that had achieved this somewhere in my, let's say I had been able to do this, I had been able to get all of these things in one of my tanks, and I was the first one to do it. I would claim this milestone. I would put my little flag there, which says that if at the end of the game I'm going to get 5 points. Then it goes 4, 3, and 3. And I also get these 2 little special milestone fish, which are colored differently, but in every other respect, they act exactly the same as the normal large fish and small fish. The difference here is I can put these immediately in any tank I want. They don't have to be adjacent to the assistant. All right, so maybe I did something like that. All right, you could put them adjacent, but you don't have to. You could put them in the same tank. You could put them in separate tanks. All right, so you are also trying to achieve these milestone points at the end of the game. At the end of the game, after you've gone through 4 rounds in a 4-player game, 3 rounds in a 3-player game, you are going to count up all your points. You're going to be gaining points from a few different areas. Number 1, you're going to be gaining points for 1 point for every 3 funds you have. You're also going to get points that are printed here on the board. For every pair of large and small fish, they have to be in the same tank, you'll get 3 points. For every sea turtle, you'll get 2 points. For every shark, you'll get 2 points. For every seahorse, you'll get 2 points. For every whale shark, you'll get 4. For every coral, you'll get 1. You also are going to be adding up your milestone points at the end of the game, and that is going to be determining who the highest score is going to win, okay? Also, one last thing is there are points related to where you are on the turn order tracker, 3, 2, 1, 0 for 4th place at the end of the game. Add all those up, whoever has the most points wins. There is a opportunity to have some advanced sea life that you can add in. They are just some extra tokens that kind of give you some end game points dependent upon which of these tokens you have. So that's considered to be an advanced variant. What I showed you here is the basic game. All right, well, let's head back over and I'll let you know what I think about Aqua Garden. Okay, so there's Aqua Garden, a certainly charming looking game that has a bit more going on than you might expect just by looking at the kind of small and unassuming box. The first thing I like to do is talk about a few benchmarks and first of all, setup and tear down. How difficult is it? How much time does it take? And in the case of Aqua Garden, it is a relatively short setup. I mean, once you get everyone their player board, you just have to populate the main fair board with the fish, put out your coral and seaweed on the seaboard, and you're generally good to go. I mean, it takes a little bit of time to choose the different event cards and the milestone cards, but you're talking less than 5 minutes to set the game up, which I think is perfectly reasonable for the length of the game, which isn't a terribly long game, but the setup isn't terribly long either. The other thing that I like to talk about are rules. These rules were good overall. I did feel like there was maybe a little bit of strangeness in how they were organized. Maybe just didn't feel intuitive to me how it was laid out the first time I was learning the game. I did learn the game directly from the rule book, so that's a testament to it being a fine rule book. But there were a couple of times when I was first learning where I kind of had to flip back and go, oh, okay, I think I see what they're talking about here. Just seemed like a little bit strange organization. But there were plenty of examples, and that is something that I appreciate. Whenever there was something that needed a little bit more explanation, it seemed like they always had a nice illustrated example there, and that's, again, something that I appreciate quite a bit. The other thing I like to do is talk about art and components, and boy, let me tell you, the art in this game is gorgeous. In my opinion, it just has a gorgeous aesthetic all the way along, those deep, rich blues. And this probably has my favorite set of wooden pieces in any game I can think of. All of the different screen-printed wooden meeples, for lack of a better term. I guess that would work. You can call them tokens. But all of the different sea life, just gorgeous. And when you add in the advanced fish, and you just have this beautiful panorama in front of you on the table that every time that I've taught this to a group or been at a convention, because I taught this game at a convention a number of times, people will stop and look because it is just eye-catching in every sense of the word. It really looks gorgeous on the table. And again, those wooden pieces from the sea life themselves to your little owner and assistant pieces, the fund markers, all screen printed, nice chunky pieces, very, very, very good. On the negative side, a couple of things I wanted to mention is that for endgame scoring, they do a really nice job on the fair board of laying out what the endgame points are for, the large and small fish and for the coral and everything else. The one thing they left off was the 3-to-1 conversion for funds. I don't know why. That's the only part of endgame scoring outside of the milestone cards that is not listed. And so I kind of wish they had put that on there. I don't know why they didn't. It may have just been a little miss. And I do want to point out that within the base game, there in the English version of the game, there is one advanced fish card that is misprinted. And now you can go on to Board Game Geek and get a print and play type of a redone English text. You really, once you know how it works, I don't know that you actually need the text because there is a little bit of a graphical explanation of how it works, but that is unfortunate. It would have been nice if that had been caught before the production run. But, this is coming from, I believe, a Japanese publisher, and so those types of things are possible to happen, and it was not all across the board. It was one card. I don't think it's a huge deal, but I did want to mention it. All right, so for my overall game impressions, first I'm going to talk about a couple of things that did not work as well for me, and then I'll talk about the things that I did like about the game. First thing is that by the very nature of this game, it can be slightly AP inducing for some players, I have found. Just the number of different interconnected decisions. It's not a heavy game by any means. I don't want to give the impression that it's a heavy rule set. It's not. But just the number of things to consider. The placement of your sea life, where you want to stop your assistant. And this is something I actually didn't mention in the overview. I should mention it now. When you're moving your assistant during that taking a fish phase, I said you can move 1 to 3 spaces. You can actually potentially move up to 5 spaces if you spend an extra 1 or 2 funds. And so you have that to consider. Where am I going to move my assistant? Am I going to buy any sea life? Where am I going to place these fish? Am I going to go for the milestone first, or am I going to just try to focus maybe on end game scoring? And so I've noticed with some players it can kind of grind the gears a little bit and slow things down. This may seem silly, and they actually address it in the rule book in a very, I think, charming way, but if you were really trying to, you could kind of game the system a little bit when you're doing the repopulation of the board by feeling in the bag. Since these tokens are differently shaped, and some of them, it's very clear what they are. So you're never going to confuse by feel a seahorse with a whale shark, right? They're very different sizes and shapes. And so if you were really trying to manipulate things, I suppose you could feel around and try to grab different particular fish to put out in different spaces. But as they mentioned in the rule book, they're going to count on you to play honestly and to not cheat. And quite honestly, if you're trying to cheat, you're playing the wrong game. This is not a game, I think, that lends itself to uber competitiveness. Now, maybe that's more about the player than the game, but I did want to mention that that is something you could potentially game it a little bit by trying to get particular sea life out through feeling in the bag. The last thing I want to point out that maybe is a negative is that you may potentially need expansions to keep the game feeling fresh. I think with just the base game and with those advanced fish included, you can easily get double-digit games out of this. No problem at all. I've played that many times just with the base game and with the advanced fish. But if you really wanted to get many plays, then you might be looking into some of the many small box expansions that have already been released for the game. They kind of came with the Kickstarter. But that was something I wanted to point out. Now the positives. Just a delightful theme. I absolutely adore the theme, and there were some nice mechanical integration touches to kind of help you remember. All right, well, your assistant can only get to these 2 tanks, so you have to put them in adjacent tanks. Just little things to kind of help the player along. Nice little thematic touches that make it make sense. Sure, it makes sense. If you put a shark in a tank with small and large fishes and turtles, they're probably not going to survive, so you can't have them sharing tanks. Little things like that. The big whale shark using up more oxygen than a seahorse. That makes intuitive sense. And so those are some nice mechanical integration touches that I appreciated. Another positive is that the game is very simple in structure. The rule set is not complex, but there is a really nice decision-making space within that. I kind of touched on it earlier in a slight negative in that it's such a nice decision space that some players might find themselves a little bogged down in those decisions. But again, simple rules with a nice bit of depth in the decision-making. I also just love this mechanism of last in line, next to go. There are a number of games that have done this where you can move as far as you want down a track. Francis Drake, Parks, there's a number of different games, Takedo, to an extent, where you can go as far as you want, but whoever is last will be the next to go. And so you could really jump forward for that whale shark, maybe halfway down the track, but then you're probably going to have to wait for 4 or 5 other people to take turns, maybe even longer, before you get a next turn. I love that mechanism. I really feel like it adds a nice bit of tension. Okay. Also, this game plays in a reasonable amount of time. In a 3-player game, it's quicker because it's 3 rounds, although it kind of evens out. 4-player game, 4 rounds. It feels like just the right amount of time. It does not overstay its welcome. I think if it went an extra round, it probably would. And so I feel like it's just the perfect amount of game in the amount of time that you play it, especially when you compare it to the time for setup and teardown. It all works very well. I mentioned as a slight negative before that you might need expansions to add to the replay value. A positive is that there are multiple expansions available. They're very small boxes. They all would fit right in the base game if you got rid of the expansion boxes. And they add a great amount of replay value to the game. I don't know that it necessarily needs it. If you're going to be playing it many, many times, then it's nice to have them. And if you do have them, they add some nice little twists, some unique player powers, some scoring opportunities, things along those lines. All things considered, Aqua Garden is a charming package in a relatively small box, plays in a great amount of time, lovely theme, nice decision space. Overall, I'm giving this an 8.5 out of 10 and a seal of excellence. I really feel like this game stands out in a very crowded market right now of kind of simple, puzzly type games, but this one feels different. I really feel like this has a potentially large fan base out there if maybe it's going to get out there in wider production, which I don't know. I believe it was only a Kickstarter. It would be wonderful if someone could pick this up and if it can go to retail, because I do think that there is a wide appeal here if people get a chance to check it out. All right, well, that's it for me. This is Mike DiLisio signing off from Dice Tower headquarters.